So I'd like to welcome everybody to our final NGO Committee on the Family event for the, we usually say the academic year, this General Assembly, however you want to put it. It's our final one. We usually go on summer hiatus for June, July, and August, and we'll return in the fall. Just a couple of words before we get started. My name is Ryan Coe, and I represent Latter-day Saint Charities. And I have been serving for the last 4 years along with Ben Freer of Fairleigh Dickinson University, right? Fairleigh Dickinson University, as the co-chairs of the NGO committee. And this marks the end of our time as co-chairs. Per the bylaws, you can only serve for two-year terms. And so we are completing our tenure. And so this is not only our last event of the year, it's our last event of our tenure as the co-chairs. At the end of today's meeting, we will be turning the floor over to Siobhan Heaton-Kennedy for presentation of the new slate of officers and for the election from the assembled. And so we'll do that at the end of the meeting today. So let's go ahead and get started, and I will present our speakers. So as many of you know, the United Nations has designated May 15th as the International Day of Families. And so we've always tried to, over the last few years, do an event commemorating the International Day of Families. And we've tried to do it, and we've tried to work in conjunction, or at least along similar themes, as the UN focal point on the family, Renata Kaczmarska. And so this year, the theme of this morning's event with Renata was families and urbanization. And we've decided to go ahead and keep on going with that theme. And so we're going to try to explore the impact of urbanization on families for both good and ill. Greater access to education, technology, and infrastructure may increase the presumed quality of life of rural and Indigenous populations. However, that same access may threaten families and cultures if children fail to preserve family bonds, lore, and even language. So we have today three speakers, but two presentations. Our first speaker is Susan Roylance, who is one of the founders of United Families International. Many of you on the committee, we know Susan. We've known her for a long time. She's spoken to us before, but always in a more academic sense, right? She's looked at the analysis of different trends. She gave us one presentation a few years ago, right after the SDGs were codified, talking about family and the SDGs and what we can learn from that and how we can, use the SDGs for that, et cetera. But for the past little while, I think about 1.5 years, 2 years, Susan has been resident in Guatemala, where she's directing humanitarian and development projects. And so we're excited to hear how her practical experience is informed by and informs her academic knowledge. So she's looking at it more from a practitioner standpoint today than from an academic standpoint. Our other presentation today is going to be by Amy Fa'atuafe and Al Pooley of the Native American Fatherhood and Families Association. Al is the founder and president of the association, and Amy is the executive director. I will introduce them actually a little bit more when we go to their presentation so that we don't forget who they are when it's time for them to speak. So we'll turn the time over now to Susan for our first presentation. So take it away, Susan.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Whoop, I didn't do what it was supposed to do. So I better stop and do it again. There's always something that doesn't quite work like it's supposed to. Ah, where did it go? Oh, it's right there. There we go. Okay, as Ryan said, oh, why is that not going? Are you seeing the, there we go. There it goes. Okay, when we were involved with Habitat 3, and there was a lot of discussion about the urban family area, I said, look, if we would just focus on rural, then we'd have a lot less problems in the urban areas. So some of that I'll present both. Some of you may wonder, what am I doing in Guatemala and what am I doing in Cabon, which is one of the highest poverty areas in the world. I'll talk about that in a minute. On a mission for our church, and then COVID hit and we couldn't do that. And then Hurricane Eta hit in Guatemala. We were hoping to come to Guatemala and we'd talk to people here. And there were heavy rain for 15 days straight. And there was extreme flooding. Oh, I misspelled extreme. In the areas, particularly Alta Paz department, where we are now. It's like a state in Guatemala. I prayed to know what we could do to help because we were planning on coming here, and found out that the water was dirty. It was terrible. Even in this city, their regular water service was completely stopped. And so we got involved and we raised the money for 5,000 water filters. These are Sawyer water filters that last for 10 years. And Bob came in November of 2020 to show them how to use the filters. And while he was here, the mayor asked Bob to come and help them with their agriculture. And he agreed. So in January of 2021, we arrived in Cabon amid the COVID pandemic. Our family was traumatized that we would come here during that, but we're fine. This is a map that shows you, the first one is the poverty rate based on just general poverty below $1.90 a day in Guatemala. The second one is those who are in poverty, showing the situation. And that little star is where we are in the Cabon district. The Cabon district has 80,000 people, 207 villages, with 83% poverty and 53% extreme poverty. And I have seen extreme poverty. I know what it is and what the people are dealing with. I've also seen great happiness in those villages. Here's a picture. I have several that are really nice, but you can see they're all dressed very nicely. They look happy, which they are. And so from what you see here, a rural point of view, these people are very happy there. And there's disadvantages, which we'll talk about, but they are very happy. And I will tell you that babies, children up to 2 and 3, you never hear them cry. They're always happy. They're always with their mothers, and because their mothers nurse them and keep them with them all the time, they're very confident and just walk around and very happy. It's really a wonderful thing to see how happy these families are generally. The World Bank made some very dramatic comments in 2016. They actually repeated it again in 2022. Agricultural development is one of the most powerful tools to end extreme poverty, boost shared prosperity 2050. Growth in the agriculture sector is 2 to 4 times more effective in raising income than among the poorest compared to other sectors. And in considering that, the analysis in 2016 found that 65% of the poor working adults were making a living through agriculture. So if we could increase what they could make in agriculture, that's the fastest way to solve the poverty problem. And these are some of the things that we've discovered, the impact on the modern world and rural areas. Now you'll recognize a lot of these things are not a problem. Technology has revolutionized this type of an area. Clear back in the remote rural areas, they have cell phones. The mountains are high, but the signals are high enough that it reaches down and they can see what's going on in the world. Of course, that's good and bad. There's a lot of things on our cell phones that are not too good and they've had no experience generally with it, so it can be difficult. There's mobile clinics that can get to people and help them. There's telehealth. The internet, which a lot of that is dependent upon the internet, is giving them an opportunity to gain knowledge that they never could have gained before. And they can get the internet. They get it through the same technology that allows their cell phones. The thing that's interesting with transportation is motorcycles. A lot of the area where we are is very remote. And there are not roads back into a lot of it, but motorcycles could get there. There's trails, and so motorcycles have given them transportation that they didn't have before. And modern road construction is just phenomenal. I mean, the roads that are being built into this area, we call it the road to nowhere, and it's billions of dollars of a highway construction going through the mountains. Electricity, solar has changed the electricity possibilities. People can get electricity in remote areas, and generators. People have generators. Some of these villages, they may have only one generator, but they have it for important things. Like when Bob goes and gives his workshops, they use the generators so he can show his PowerPoint. And then banking options, as you know, online banking is possible. So there's a lot of things that are possible for families now in rural areas that haven't been in my younger years. So what are the impacts on families in urban areas? The positive, of course, is education. And we know people here who left their families. I mean, it was a mutual decision, but they left their family here in the Cabon area and went to a city to live with relatives so they could get an education. Those people are the leaders here now. They didn't get this education here. They had to go to an urban area. So that's a great value of urban areas. Healthcare. Healthcare is sort of here. The biggest thing is they do have ambulances that can take you to Coban, and then they can take you on to Guatemala City if it's very serious. We know of some interesting situations in that, but healthcare is more generally available in the urban areas. Sanitation. By and large, you have sanitation that the cities are in charge of, and housing is much better. They have more business opportunities and more transportation. The negatives, and they're truly there because we've seen it in Kenya, in Nairobi, and other places, is crowding. A lot of times you'll have a lot of people in these that's been moved to these urban areas that are not really prepared, and they're living in little shacks that are really much worse than what they're living here in the poverty areas. Unemployment isn't always available. People are not usually trained. They do not have appropriate skills to be able to employ, and so we know people who lived in the slums in Kenya, where he was getting $1 a day, he'd get milk and he'd sell it a cup at a time. And one of their problems, they had a child that got sick, and truly there was a government health care, but they had to afford private health care in order to get good health care, and standing in line at the public hospital, his child died. In the cities, there's some problems that are greater with health problems because they spread easily, and in the rural areas, it's a lot more free from that type of problem. Traffic problems in Guatemala City, it's 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon to get into and out of. And the pollution is immense, and it's very, very difficult. There's more crime in the cities, and there's more air problems, noise and water. So there are very serious negatives about the cities that the people in the rural areas don't have to deal with as much. But education is big, healthcare is big, sanitation is big, and so the business opportunities, they're very important reasons why the urban areas are great. So the impact on families in the rural areas are the positive. They own their own land. I had an interesting experience this last week. We were in one of the rural remote areas, and I asked this father. He happened to have 7 children. Actually, most of them, interestingly, only have 2 or 3. So family planning has been working even in the remote villages. And I asked him, why would you like to live here versus living in the city? He says, because I can own land here. And I want some land for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And he was looking to the future, and what he was doing there was to live where their families have. There's a community spirit that's just great in these villages. It's peaceful. It's very peaceful. Family togetherness, happy younger children, like I talked about. But of course, the negative is education. Teachers don't want to go out and live in the extreme rural areas and live to be teachers, so it's hard to get teachers. And they oftentimes don't have a school. We have one village that we are spending a lot of time with where the children haven't had any education for 4 years, and the government won't recognize their village to be able to have a school. So we said, well, maybe if we build a school. I said, how much would it cost to build a school? $2,000 to build a school. they will provide the materials. So that's not very much money. I said, well, we can do that. Maybe they'll recognize you have to do that. We said, we can pay for a school teacher. Well, you can't do that because the school teacher has to be authorized by the government. So that's a problem. Transportation. A lot of children have not had education because they can't get to a school. Anyway, that's another long story. Medical treatment, emergencies, hospitals, we've talked about that. Sports, entertainment are generally not available. One of the first things they want is a soccer field. And sometimes the municipality's been able to do it. They have done a few, but there's a lot of them don't have anything like that they can do. And there's not even any animals to go hunt. In these mountains, the animals have been so severely hunted and eaten that there aren't any. There's none to have babies. And the food and nutrition problems can be a problem, and there's a lot of hard work. So sometimes the families are working so hard that the kids don't have time to go to school. So that's a big negative on rural areas. So why do families choose rural? The environment is calm and beautiful. They have friends. They're very warm-hearted and great support. They work for themselves. As one man says, I don't want to work for somebody else in the city. I'll work here for myself and I'll own some land. Their traditions are great for families, for generations have lived there, and they prepare for the future of the children and the grandchildren the way they think is best. Children might not agree, but that's what they do. In fact, there's a lot of these children that give anything to go to the US, and they always see us as a possibility of that. So that's difficult. So here's the SDGs. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I could, but I won't. But to start with, Indian poverty. The quickest way to end poverty, extreme poverty especially, is to build up the rural areas and help them to create employment opportunities. The quickest way to feed a projected, what is it, some billion people, I don't see it, by 2050 is to increase the agriculture capability. And Bob is doing a lot with that. I mean, their ability to feed the people here is going to be greatly enhanced by the work that he's doing. It's just great. And the growth in the agriculture sector is 2 to 4 times more effective in raising incomes among the poorest compared to other sectors. So the solution is to create employment opportunities in the rural areas. Improve the infrastructure and transportation in the rural areas and build and improve schools and health clinics in the rural areas. When you think they're living in rural areas and depending upon that for their livelihood, what would happen if we threw all those people in the cities? It would be horrible. So we can't just talk about urbanization, although there's many advantages. We have to recognize that the agriculture rural areas is where the real solutions exist. And the other thing, of course, I've talked some about education. I don't have much time left, but the education gap is huge. And in rurals, they don't have school books. They don't have transportation. They have poor housing for teachers. They have poor facilities for the schools, no electricity or internet, obviously no computers. However, there are organizations coming here. Mentors International is one that's putting in a computer, place for computers. They put it in a neighboring city, and they're going to be coming here, a computer lab, so that these youth can learn how to use computers. That'll greatly enhance their ability to get jobs both here and in the cities, and possibly things that connect to the rural areas. The positives are students are anxious to learn. I'll tell you, they are so sweet. These kids in this one area that we're helping, they say they want to study. They don't say, I want to go to school. They say, I want to study. And that is so precious. And you can see over here the urban positives, better schools, all of those things. There's many. So that basically takes you through my presentation, urban versus rural. There's lots of differences in both. We're here to help the people here because we love helping agriculture people, and it's been very successful. Last year we had a demonstration plot where they, Bob, 4 times greater the production than they normally have. And we're doing that now in other villages, and the farmers are really anxious about it. So it's great to be with you and to share some of our experiences here. I hope that is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm just going to ask you one quick question before we move on to our next presentation. And if anybody has other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll also be uploading a copy of Susan's presentation to the chat so that people can have access to that should they want it. but when we're talking about families and increasing agricultural production, it just brings me back to say, the United States, hundreds of years ago, where people would have these very large families because all the kids had to work on the farm. So I'm assuming that the families are taking a part in this increased agricultural production, but how does that affect the families and these kids' opportunities to study if they are now, because the farm is yielding more, are needed to work?
Well, it doesn't change. If you get 4 times more production out of your land than you did before, you don't need your children as much as you did before. So, and the parents are very anxious to have their children go to school. This one man, Bob asked him what he needed most, and he said, "I just want you to teach my daughter English." Now, of course, English is, we're one of the few people around here that speak English, so that's a long shot, but we could also help with that. But they want that for their children. They don't want to move them to the city, but they do want them to be educated, and that's a problem. It's the same thing. However, they don't have big families. They have 2 or 3 children, so it's not like it used to be in the U.S. where the children are what made the farm productive.
That's fascinating. And then just for everybody's knowledge, Susan was talking about the increased technology and internet capabilities of rural areas. She's currently in Guatemala. And so if the sound was coming through a little bit spotty for you as it was for me, it's because she's currently in Guatemala and joining us from there. So we'll now turn over to our next presentation, and this is from Amy and Al of the Native American Fatherhood and Families Association. So just very briefly, Amy Fa'atuafe is part Navajo and Hopi and was raised in Mesa, Arizona. She joined NAFFA staff in October 2015 as their program director. Prior to working for NAFFA, Amy worked with the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community for nearly 10 years in their social services department. Amy received her master's in social work from Arizona State University with an emphasis on planning, administration, and community. She is a mother and wife and loves spending time with her family. Al Pooley was born to the Hopi and Navajo Native American cultures. He grew up close to both cultures on the reservation, where the love of a father taught him outstanding life's lessons. He holds a master's of social work and master's of public administration. Mr. Pooley also has extensive experience as a marriage and family counselor. He appreciates the role of being a father, and he finds joy in teaching principles that are relevant to his Native American culture. And just a word about the organization. The Native American Fatherhood and Families Association began in 2002 with just one father and the mission of bringing men back to strengthening their families. Since then, NAFFA has successfully impacted thousands of lives and families through 3 signature curricula. 1, Fatherhood is Sacred and Motherhood is Sacred. 2, Linking Generations by Strengthening Relationships. And 3, Addressing Family Violence and Abuse. They have elected to present to us together. So they're going to do a joint presentation for us, and we'd like to turn the time over to them. So take it away.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thanks for that introduction too. We appreciate that, and for the opportunity we have to be here with you all. So a little bit about our organization is we work with tribes all across the country, Native American tribes throughout the US and Canada. And Al here, he's the founder, he started it, and our whole focus is on strengthening families by promoting responsible fatherhood and motherhood. And so our approach with the curriculum that was just read and mentioned, we have different approaches, and it's really of how to strengthen the families. And so we've had the opportunity to participate in the United Nations 4 years in a row prior to COVID. And with that, we are able to share our piece of how important family is and how it is with our Native cultures as well. And so several weeks ago, I got a phone call from Marcia Barlow, and she asked for an invitation for us to come and present to you all and kind of put perspective of rural communities in the Native Indigenous communities that we serve. And so we work with over 250 tribes across the country. And definitely a lot of the things that Ms. Roylance mentioned in Guatemala are very similar to our reservation areas as well. Several of our families, they are migrating into the urban areas. One example, in just Navajo Nation, we're both enrolled in Navajo, And they're the largest tribe in the whole United States. And they have just under 300,000 enrolled members. And a couple months ago, we were talking with the first lady there at the Navajo Nation, and she was mentioning that over half of the Navajos don't live on the reservation anymore. They've moved off the reservation to different communities. A lot of them are here in the urban areas. We're in Mesa, Phoenix area. So there's a lot all throughout. And so that changes a lot of dynamics on the reservations as well. So we'll let Al talk about that piece as well.
Okay, we actually have three missions here. One is to strengthen families that are already intact, mother, father, and children. The other one is to how do you keep families together? And that is you have people that are getting divorced. There's more divorces going on today than ever. But if there's children involved, how do we still keep families together? Because the two most important people in the children's lives is their father and mother. Then the other thing we have here is how do we reunite families? Because a lot of people have been adopted or have been raised in the foster system and they don't know their families, or they've been incarcerated for long periods of time. And so we do those three things. I'm a marriage and family therapist by profession. And there's been a lot of different modalities that are used out there that are very effective, but many times they're not as effective as we'd like them to be with our Native people. And so what I've done is that there are some men and women that don't want to be fathers and mothers, but they have children. So what we're trying to do in our first program, Native Americans, every tribe that we've worked with, and I've worked with over 400 tribes throughout my career, and every tribe believes in spirituality. They believe in the Creator, they believe in Creator God, every tribe. They believe in prayer. And so what we're doing is that we're saying to them, that's wonderful. And so we want them to connect to that. We say, connect with your forefathers, connect with your ancestors, because they're around us. Native people believe that our ancestors are around us. And so we tell them that there's several things you take after you die. One of them is that you may have a career that lasts 20, 30, 40 years, then you retire. We tell them, guess what? You can be someone's mother and father for a long time. After you die, you're still going to be someone's father and mother. So let's look at that. And we say, okay, fatherhood and motherhood are honorable and noble professions because they're going to last for a long, long time, even into the eternities. So we want to ground our fathers and mothers on solid foundations. And a lot of people have what they call parenting programs. They're very good. Parenting programs are not. But if you don't want to be a parent, it just kind of goes in one ear, goes out the other ear. So we let's look at, because Native people understand spiritual things, like they look at mountains or rivers or canyons as being spiritual, as being sacred, as being sacred. Even animals like buffaloes and eagles, they're called sacred. So we say, let's look at that. We say, what are the two most sacred things on earth? And we just say, I'm just going to remind you, I'm just bringing back to your remembrance. The two most sacred things on earth is your role as a father and your role as a mother. And that's laying the foundation. And when people hear that, they immediately identify with that. And they say, I've never heard that. I've never heard that, because our families are breaking up. Native American families are breaking up. We have the highest rate of addictions, the highest rate of school dropouts, of teen pregnancies, of suicide among any other group in the country. In fact, we just learned in South Dakota that the population in South Dakota for the Native population is roughly around 7% of the total state is Native American. But in the prison system, 40% of the males in prison are Native men. 80% are the females that are in prison. 80% are Native American women. That's just unbelievable. And that's across every field. Why? Because Native people they've been subject to so much. Okay, got distracted. They've been broken up by so many people. In other words, what I'm saying here is that a lot of the time, the choices of our people have been taken away by governments, by different religions, by different things like this. Now, again, a lot of times people look, and I tell them we have to learn to think for ourselves and bring back the idea of we have to choose to be good fathers and mothers. But it's the responsibility of our fathers and mothers that we tell them that there's going to be a lot of changes. You know, technology is coming on and things like this. So right over the past histories, Native people had to go off to boarding schools. I'm a subject of boarding schools. And, you know, when you go off to boarding schools, you don't have you're not involved with your families. I remember my mother, I was going to college for the first time. My youngest brother was just turning 8 years old, and he went off to boarding school. And I saw my mother crying for days, literally days. I never knew that because I went to schools myself, but when my siblings went to school, my mother just cried and cried and cried. So it has impact on the families. So a lot of families have left the reservation to go to work in the urban areas because there's really very little opportunities on the reservation. There's no infrastructure. It sounds all good, but when you really look at it, the family is really breaking up big time. And so that's what we're involved in right now, is how do we strengthen the families and how do we keep families together and how do we reunite families? In fact, a lot of our kids today are being raised in foster care. They're being raised on the streets, or they're being raised in penal institutions, jails. So anyway, urban and reservation are both very difficult because with no father and mother involved, it's difficult whether you're in urban or a reservation. And unemployment is very, very high. So I'll let Amy go ahead and talk for a minute.
So along with, you know, a lot of the things that Ms. Roylance had said earlier too, I find those very similar to the native reservations as well, the rural areas. Even just something as simple as the roads. I know that was mentioned too, of the, you know, out on the reservation where our family's from, it's dirt roads. And so if there's a storm that comes through, you can't leave your home for several days. And so if you don't have food, you can't provide for them. Same thing with animals, you know, it's very limited farming now because there's, like you talked about earlier, is it Ryan? Okay, I thought I got your name right. So just like Ryan mentioned earlier too, you know, the large families, the families are getting smaller. I think every culture, it seems like they're getting smaller over time, and being able to not provide, have the extra hands there, or they go in town and they work, they go to the urban setting for whether it's education, for employment, for health. Also in the rural areas, the healthcare is not good. Typically they'll have Indian Health Services. Maybe they'll have a clinic. If not, it's miles and miles away. Their law enforcement is also another issue on our reservations for the rural areas. Sometimes they have their own tribal law enforcement, or sometimes they have the federal law enforcement. And then even then, a phone call can take what we're used to here in the urban setting. Police department or fire department could be there within 3 to 5 minutes. In the rural areas on the reservations, it can take even up to days for them to actually respond, to get a detective out for a homicide or for something like that. And so there's just lots of things and reasons as to why a lot of our Native people are leaving their rural areas that they were born and raised on and grew up on. Very, very seldom too are they able to, or do they start returning back. And that's because their children then get used to the urban side of life, of kind of just having Walmart down the street and having their school and friends and bus. And same thing with the rural areas. Education's another one. They have to get bused from one location to another, and it could take over an hour to get there. And if you're living in, say, North Dakota, the reservations up there, it's icy cold and it's hard to get from one place to the next in the winter. So lots of just different dynamics that come and fold into with our tribal communities and the rural versus urban areas. That's basically kind of what we wanted to share.
Do you have any questions?
I know there's questions and answers at the end, so I think there'll be more questions. And I know chat's going on. I haven't looked at them.
Yeah,
so.
No, I'll moderate the chat. You don't need to worry
Okay,
about that.
thank you. It keeps popping and I'm trying to.
But no, thank you both. This is completely fascinating. I have one question that's really more geared towards the both of you, but then I have some that are geared that can apply. Like you said, it's interesting to see how these trends and these issues affect both of your groups that you're working with, even though that they're so many thousands of miles away, right? But specifically for Al and Amy, at the level of the United Nations and national and international institutions, excuse me, it seems like there has been a renewed focus on Indigenous people and rights. Do you feel like these efforts are placing enough focus on families, or are there ways that you would like to see family take a stronger role in these efforts? So should family be playing a stronger role in efforts to increase Indigenous rights?
I think families is really necessary, because really this family is the heart of our people. You know, you can have economic development, you can have all those things, education, but it really all boils back to the family. You don't learn very much if you're really lonely. You don't learn very much when you're really afraid. You don't. So again, it goes back to the family that really is the center of this whole thing. And I don't think some of our tribal leaders even understand that. That's why we're trying to bring it to the attention of our tribal leaders. Hey, we have to focus more on the family, because you know, why do we have such high rates of everything negative? Because the family is breaking up. And so again, we have to focus back on how do we strengthen the family, because that to me, that's the most essential part of the whole living, the whole life of everybody, of everything. It boils back down to the family.
And I agree, Ryan, with you know, that question. And there is a lot going on with Indigenous and Indigenous rights and rights of all kinds, but I feel that they're all mostly failing to put more attention on the family, because family is at the center of everything. We talk more about the right to choose, or the right for this or the right for that, but really we're doing it to make our family safe and to get them to be strong. So would I like to have Indigenous? Yes, it's great to have Indigenous rights, and I full-heartedly love that, but I would love for have it to be focused more on the family, especially at the UN level would be wonderful.
So, but if I understand you correctly, you're first trying to convince the tribes that they need to focus on the family first, because if that doesn't happen, then they're never going to advocate for it at the international level if they're not even advocating for it at the tribal level. Is that correct?
There's some truth to that. You know, I don't think politicians at best don't focus on families. You know, whether it's tribal or national politics, it's all something else besides families. You know, so I think that we need to put on as many levels as we can to how do we strengthen families, because that's important to our children. No matter what you do, it still boils back to the family.
Another question, and this is for all three of you. This is from Lynn Walsh. Could you speak more about a unique richness of life and learning that can weaken for children in urban environments? So this idea that in rural environments, there's more presence and learning from parents and extended family, learning from relating to and respecting nature, learning from hard work, versus children in urban environments who are loaded with electronics and internet and general softness, I think Lynn is trying to say. What do you find is the difference between learning styles, learning environments, between your rural and urban children?
I can speak to that. It's absolutely true that they have been preserved out in the rural areas. They're not all involved with the internet and the phones and all of those kind of things. So they're very, very naturally, and obviously, what have they been preserved for, and what's their future going to be like? But it's really amazing to see how self-confident they are, and how they are very strong in their families. I mean, we don't have problems with family disintegration here. We really don't. They're very, very solid with their families, because they don't go out into the world and get all of the other stuff that creates problems. They do have some drinking problems, but beyond that, it's pretty good.
Al and Amy, do you have anything to add?
No, I would agree. You know, just when you For example, when you live on the reservation, a kid's got to learn how to chop wood, how to butcher a lamb, how to, do all these things that a kid here in the valley or in the city doesn't know how to do. They know how to use the microwave, they know how to turn on a TV or open up their iPad, and that's kind of stereotypical, but it's the truth of a lot of the things that are just different. So work ethic, yes, I think that would be. But it depends also on the family too, of what kind of a parent are you being raised with? Is your parent teaching you how to chop wood and the importance of survival that way? Or is your parent an alcoholic who just sits at home and you do nothing, and then that child grows up with a lot of issues there. So it depends again on the family. So we bring family in on that too.
So not to be a super Debbie Downer, but one of the questions that we're getting is kind of more of these negative trends that often happen with Indigenous people and rural populations, and that's trafficking. And there's an increased level of trafficking, and that's not, human trafficking is not just sex trafficking, but also labor trafficking, right? But is that a result of urbanization, or is that just a problem of the rural nature of native lands or indigenous lands? And how does urbanization interact and play out in that dynamic of human trafficking?
Well, we work with a group here also that's part of our organization. It's called Native Search, and they look for missing women, children, and men. And we're actually finding out that a lot of the people that are being missing as it relates to Native Americans come from foster homes or group homes. After they graduate out of the foster system, a lot of them are raised in the urban areas and they go back to the reservation with a lot of these high dreams of reuniting with families, and they go back to a dysfunctional family. So they leave again, but they're aged out of the system. And so they get trafficked very easily. So again, everything from our point of view, boils back to how do we strengthen families and give people to, how do we support one another? Because here in the States, a lot of reservations are closely connected to urban settings anyway. And so the transportation is very fluid as opposed to maybe South or Central America. So again, you have urban and reservation families are really going through a lot of difficulties, and so you have there's just so much lack of opportunities in so many areas when it comes to Native people, and so I'm only speaking for the ones here in this country because I don't know too much about South or Central America or other countries, but right now the influence with Native tribes to urban settings is very close, and you can feel the effects of how families are being disrupted. And that's why we're going back to the idea of looking at putting a label on fatherhood is sacred, motherhood is sacred, because people do try to keep things together when this thing is sacred. And so we really push that. We don't bring any religion into this thing. We just say your roles of father, mother are sacred above anything else. And so when people really understand that, not know, but understand it, they are more determined to become a better parent.
Thanks. Susan, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't see a problem with trafficking that much here. I guess if it happens, we don't know about it. It's a long ways to get to Carbone. You don't just happen out there. Like he's talking about, you have transportation from the reservations to the cities. It's 2 hours to get to Carbone. Carbone is not a big city. It's a city of some proportion, I guess. And then it's 7 hours to get to Guatemala City, which is the big city. And I don't think too many of them come all the way out here to find people to take with them. I'm sure that they'd be interested if they were giving them enough money, but I really haven't heard about that problem here. I'm grateful that hasn't occurred yet that I know about. I don't know about a lot.
Okay, I have two just little factual questions. Eve Sullivan asks, she says that she sees on the website for the Native American Fatherhood and Families Association that you're having a conference on November 2nd and 3rd. Are proposals still open for presentations?
Yes, they are. And we invite all of you to attend that if you'd like. We'd love to have you. It's here in Mesa, Arizona, November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's a 3-day conference. It's called Fatherhood Is Leadership. And it'll be our 18th annual national conference we have. And our whole thing is focusing on fathers, mothers, and everything about that. And we'd love to have any of you come. We have Indigenous come from all over. So that's going to be here in Mesa, Arizona. And yes, go to our website, nativeamericanfathers.org, and you can look under our events, and everything should be on there. If not, you can feel free to email me, and I can put my email on here as well. So
Okay. And then I just have kind of a nerdy question, and this is from me. I am a lover of languages, and so I've been doing some Duolingo, trying to just brush up on some languages that I've studied and dabble in some others. But I noticed that Navajo was one of the options that you can use with Duolingo, and you can learn Navajo. Do you think that there's a resurgence now in people trying to learn Navajo and speak Navajo, versus it was maybe dying out with this increase of urbanization of people actually speaking the language? Is there a resurgence now?
Yes, there really is. Not just Navajo, but other tribes too. And so there is a resurgence in that of learning your own language and learning your custom, learning your dances, and learning your traditions and things like this. Absolutely, there is.
Well, Susan, Amy, and Al, thank you so much for being with us today and for your very, very rich, insightful presentations. We really appreciate it.